Welcome back to Roadmap, Art Trader UK's product and tech podcast. Today it's going to be a little bit different because on the couch I've got David from Equal Experts and we're going to be chatting on his favourite topic, which is quick wins. So before we kick off, David, do you want to just give a quick intro to listeners of who you are?
Well, hi, I'm David. I work for Equal Experts. They're a kind of global consultancy, but I'm based here in Manchester.
Cool. So, quick wins. We had a little bit of a pre-debate, which was super interesting. So, yeah, what is your view on quick wins? Because you were quite, animated when we chatted a few weeks ago.
Well, look, I don't want to come across as like a crank, but I hear a lot about quick wins. Every organisation I go into, and I'm lucky enough to go into organisations on a daily basis around the world, different sizes, different sectors. Everyone's talking about quick wins. Everyone's talking about low-hanging fruit, as if that's the only way to build a product strategy. So we go with things that are simple and easy, and we create confidence and momentum accordingly. And I wouldn't be speaking to those organisations if they weren't failing to a certain extent.
Right.
And so that's where I become interested in this orthodoxy around quick wins, as if that's the only game in town.
And is it like, so what did you, I know you mentioned low-hanging fruit, quick wins. So typically if you go into an organisation, what would be a good example for someone that may be like going, I'm not quite sure what that means. What would be a good example of a quick win or a low-hanging fruit?
Good question. It is because of consultants, I think, because there's a kind of 2x2 matrix, effort and impact. And quick win sits where it's low effort but high impact.
Yeah.
So this kind of idea that there are delicious pieces of fruit out there which you can easily reach out and grab and scoff down.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, when I look at a piece of low-hanging fruit that maybe I've thought up, let's say it's an idea on a roadmap, I invariably think it was more delicious. It was lower and easier to reach and much more impactful than anyone else's idea because I'm a human being. Then there's a kind of adjacent issue, which is that if I understand entirely or in general what leadership want to hear and what they want to prioritise, I might consciously or subconsciously also nudge ideas into that quadrant in order for them to be prioritised. And it leads to crazy decision making, even though everyone thinks they're being hyper rational.
Right. Yeah, it's immense, this room. I just love it watching all the people go by. You know what? If we could just make everybody out that side like and subscribe, we'll be absolutely smashing it. Back to the podcast. Because the thing, I was doing a little bit of reading beforehand because I was trying to prep for this. Not that we're going to have a two-sided debate and I'm like, it's all about quick wins. And you're like, you're mad. But it was more like, I started reading it and I think it was something you mentioned around like the whole marginal gains and cycling because I'm into biking, but the whole how you can very quickly get seduced by the concept of it. And is that because of that sort of the feeling that, again, I can get a quick hit with that minimal effort? Is that where the dopamine start flowing from?
That's exactly it. I think it's a deceptively simple answer to a really tough question, which is how can I make a substantial difference in my business without a huge amount of time and effort because we haven't got time?
Yeah.
And so like that marginal gains that you mentioned, how do you take British cycling, which hadn't won a gold medal in the Olympics for 100 years, to be the greatest cycling nation on earth? How do you do it? Well, you do it 1% at a time, apparently. But actually it wasn't anything to do with that.
So what is, because I mean I've got loads of questions on this, but before, so what is the alternative then? So if it isn't there's that, when you say quick wins, I don't know why, I get these images in my head of this, it's like Adam and Eve, there's a tiny little apple just hanging there I can grab and then a big bite and then I'm banished. But what is the alternative? So if you're going into an organisation, like you said, and they've got all these low effort, high impact thoughts that everyone's come up with, what is the alternative?
Well, I'll give you an example. I went into an organisation, they were doing a kind of classic transformation pattern where they were taking kind of ball of mud monolith and they wanted to transform into like a shiny microservices infrastructure, that whole thing. I said, help me understand a bit of context and history about your organisation. How did you get into this situation in the first place? Well, help me understand what we're actually replatforming. And it was a platform called C4. I said, well, help me understand C2 and C3. And they said, no, it's called C4 because if we touch it, it'll explode. And it was their core.
That is brilliant.
It was their core platform. It was funny, but it also held an inconvenient truth because it was the core of their business. Oof. And they'd spent so long faffing around the edges with quick wins,
Yeah.
that they'd ignored this problem in the centre of their business, which had just become a black hole. And they could no longer fix it. They had to write it off and start again from scratch,
Yeah.
which is long and expensive.
So, if you'd been able to turn back time in that particular organisation and you'd seen this starting to happen, what would you have said at that point? There's like to get them off the juice of quick wins and into a different model.
It's so easy for me to say, right? But every organisation has these buried giants. And it doesn't have to be tech, right? It could be, for example, there's a lack of diversity within this organisation,
Yeah.
and therefore we all think the same, for example.
Yeah.
And so, wherever possible, you should be looking for the most valuable things in your business and being proactive about maintaining them and not letting them slip behind. And by most valuable, I mean they represent the biggest return on investment. Now, they may be difficult, but that is better than the cumulative effect of running thousands of low-impact experiments all the time, because that's inherently wasteful and will not solve your problems.
So what if, this is the bit that we didn't really get into when we were just having a pre-talk, was, so what if the thing that is most impactful is a small thing and a quick win?
Well, then you've got a tiny business or you're very lucky.
Right. Because that was the bit when we were chatting, and I know we're probably going to go on to the next question, like going, but there's always going to be quick wins. So is if like I'm guilty of, because I've used like what are the quick wins, or is there any low hanging fruit? I can remember coming on to like a finance replatforming project, which was gnarly, but I'm like just looking for a win because it was gnarly, it was stalled. And when we started talking, I'm like, God, have I been going in the wrong direction? So if then we are looking, how does then like a growth strategy where you're looking at squeezing the absolute most juice out the fruit, how does that fit into this, like what you believe is the myth of, I'm not saying you believe, but I'm not saying you're crackpot, but like the David Cox theory is it, have you patented this theory or anything, or?
No, I've become the fruit man.
Going back to it is, so where does, like, if you've got growth experts that are looking at whether moving the button to the left or right or different colours are going to get that more out of the actual product, where does that sit? Is that a quick win or is that something different?
Look, I don't want to be absolutist about this, because that's where you get off the beaten track.
Yeah, that's where I need to go.
Of course, you can get from 0 to 1 by doing 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. The idea that instead of Bruce Bogtrotter eating the whole cake, you eat it a slice at a time, that's fine. I'm not against that.
Yeah.
But untethered incrementalism, the idea that we're just doing a bunch of stuff all the time. And your product and engineering organisation is always busy, all the time, just on stuff. But that stuff is an end unto itself. It's not a stepping stone to something proactively identified as larger and significant and substantial. That's where you run into problems.
Right. So again, going back to then like the real world examples, and without like naming companies, because obviously it'd be a bit dodgy, especially because you're probably going into them on a daily basis. So is that those examples, is that where you then can see the patterns of the quick wins, that you can then start to form ideas of, well, actually, what is it you're shooting for? Start to rationalise those and go, actually, these things that you had identified as low-hanging fruit are probably stepping stones on the path, but this is just noise. And you start to then shed the noise with then getting a clear, like, whatever strategy of this is the direction, which may include some quick wins, but also some big, gnarly steps that you need to take.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
You want to help organisations make sure that they're placing their effort and their emphasis in the right places. And one thing about Agile is that because it is inherently, in the language of the manifesto back in 2001, it's all about speed and indefinitely keeping up a kind of pace. It means that in major transformations, what I see is that you start with all of the quick wins. And what you're doing is you're brushing ahead of you all the hard conversations.
Yeah.
And so then when you've funded it for 2 years and you're 18 months in, you've got half a bridge. And you've got the other half of the bridge is going to be super hard to do. And you've run out of money. and actually,
I've seen these.
And it's a shame there wasn't a conversation about the sequencing, basically. Like
Yeah.
I said, quick wins are lovely because they build confidence and momentum amongst teams. I'm not blind to that.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying, the diet of low-hanging fruit means organisation starve.
Yeah. And who is it you find, again, this is probably organisational stuff, but I'm just interested in, if you go into an organisation, who is it that is absolutely, typically, who is obsessed with the quick wins? Is it the engineers, or is it someone trying to make the name for themselves, or is it just a general organisational things where they've just become blinded to it?
Yeah, I wouldn't call anyone out in particular, and like every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. Yeah. Leadership want quick wins, especially in FTSE 100 companies, because they want announceables to the city. But in general, everyone has stopped questioning this orthodoxy. Everyone talks about quick wins and low-hanging fruit. I must hear it every day. And these aren't foolish people. These are ambitious people who want the best for their organisation, but they've lost sight of the fact that it cannot only ever be that.
And so what is the, again, if intelligent people trying to do the right thing, maybe being blinded by this myth, is how do you correct course? How do you persuade them that this is not the right way? Do you then go, I mean, like, what is, because obviously that is quite, if you're in that grain of thought, if a business has been doing that for a number of years, how do you get them to change course? Because obviously, you know, I know I can see coming in, but from typical consultancies, you have a limited amount of time to do things. So is there a biggest bang for your buck, which is that a quick win, that then goes, I can start to correct course this problem?
It's a good question. It's about recentering the conversation around return on investment.
Right.
If you are doing 100 things and you're all advancing each one of those an inch, you're only ever going an inch forward every quarter. Whereas if you're brave enough to identify 10 things, you could progress them 10 inches. Do you see what I mean? It's a times 10 thing.
Yeah.
And so it's about that conversation. Let's concentrate our forces around the most impactful things in your business, even if they are difficult, because they are difficult.
Yeah. Have you seen then, just again, maybe these aren't companies where you've been a consultant, just businesses that are known where they have fallen by the wayside because they haven't tackled the gnarly things, or likewise, conversely, ones that clearly have and then have gone on to succeed massively?
Well, one thing to say is that, I mean, 98.475% of all statistics are made up, but I see headlines around the number of transformations that fail. It's 80+%. They fail because of this. They build a business case about a great return on investment, and they waste all that money and time on the quick wins, and then they're not left with much. And that is across all sectors, private and public.
Right. Interesting. So this is so if so many businesses are failing on this, then why is it that maybe this is my naivety, when you suggested and you said people might think I'm a crackpot, or when we suggested the topic, and I'm like, well, that's going to be really interesting. Why is it that then still it is a myth that people get seduced by? If there's a high percentage of failure of big strategic programs of work fail because of this, why do people still go down that route?
Another good question. I think it's a couple of things. You mentioned dopamine hit. So having small wins, even though they're small, they're still a win. Yeah. People remember those. And the second thing is people don't see the C4 examples as being failures. They see it as just what happens. As in, like, we have legacy tech, and over time it gets out of date, and then we have to completely write off, and then we have to build C5, and then in 5 years' time that'll be old, and we'll have to build C6. And they don't see that actually that is an avoidable pattern.
Yeah. And if companies do survive on that pattern, do you think if they'd followed the alternative, they would have been further ahead on their mission, or much more successful, making more money? Yeah. Or because the way I'm going in my head is like, it's a bit like, I don't know, like buying clothes. You can go and buy expensive ones and like invest in that bit, or you can just keep getting really throwaway stuff. And in the end, it might not be as good, but you seem to get there. So is it more it's wasteful? So is it wasteful of resources, the quick win approach?
It's a recipe for keeping people really busy to the point of burnout and not really getting a lot done.
Yeah.
It is true. But there are organisations and sectors that have had a look at themselves and gone to that most painful and difficult place in their business model and said, we're going to address that head on. And they are the ones who make a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting, we had a talk, it's quite a while ago now, with Catherine, our COO, and we were talking about that whole move from print to digital. So when I joined Art Trader, we were a print business. Digital was on the up, but I had no inclination that print was about to be retired. And then we retired and got rid of all the magazines and then went fully digital. And it felt like at the time, with building closures, people moving into different roles, it was extremely painful. But then I look back now, like not extremely painful, that's probably the wrong way to say it, but it was a big change. There was big system changes. It was all gnarly things that were happening. But then I can't now imagine, like it's whatever, 12, 13 years on, and it is like a completely different business. And we're still iterating and looking at quick wins, but also looking at big strategic next steps. So is that the one where unconsciously, I mean, it probably was unconsciously for me because I don't talk strategy or think strategy, but we had quick wins in place, but they were all part of the from what you see, all part of the long-term plan. Therefore, they weren't wrong or bad quick wins.
Yeah, you also rebased your business entirely. So you've already climbed up the mountain.
Yeah.
Right? If you had waited for whatever was lying in store for the motoring magazine world to happen to you and not proactively anticipate that and change your business entirely, then you wouldn't have been able to iterate your way out of that problem. You would have been either a much, much, much smaller business or you would have gone out of business.
Yeah. So that must have been, I mean, like at the time, probably some of the leaders that are here now were part of that leadership team. So I'm assuming that they were like, we need to bite the bullet. These are gnarly problems. Like, let's not go for the quick win of maybe we're going to reduce the magazine. We're going to change the paper of the magazine.
Exactly.
We're going to make it slimmer and slimmer and slimmer, up the quality, or keep eking it and eking it and eking it, and then go, actually, nobody wants this anymore.
That's exactly the pattern.
Yeah.
That people try and iterate their way out of trouble. Think about the climate crisis. We're not going to get out of that situation by washing up Marmite jars. We need...
I don't know how you get Marmite out of those jars.
I must be hungry, but like we're going to need global governments working alongside one another to pass legislation and regulation in order to fundamentally change the way we consume resources on this planet.
Yeah.
It is not going to be nudges here or there. That is a neoliberal dream.
Right. So going back into the tech sector, is there other, so I don't want to just talk about Art Trader because I like, especially you move around, is there other industries or other tech businesses or businesses that do a lot of software development where you've seen also that, whether they either took a really brave decision and transformed themselves or likewise haven't, and it's just they've gone down that being seduced by the myth of quick wins?
Well, I love the BBC. Their building of the iPlayer decades ago now was really amazing in the way they looked at what the trends were in their market and they proactively positioned themselves as a streaming service alongside their linear TV and radio. Now, that was an amazing move. They were way ahead of I think in those days, Netflix was still posting out DVDs.
Yeah.
Like that was an incredible move and one they should be proud of and one they've maintained because despite, the masses of VC and private equity flowing into places like Netflix, etc., during the streaming wars, the iPlayer is still as good, if not better, because it is a great interface plus they have the content, and so it's a great mix. But if they had just gone, oh man, we're in trouble when we don't know what to do, for example, Channel 4 was in the news this last week, they are in trouble. They have not anticipated the move, and they have done what you said would be the anti-pattern in Auto Trader. They've made their magazine less good, and they've got less paper, and they've made it shorter. And I would say that out of all the 5 major channels, I suppose, in this country, Channel 4 is now in the most trouble. Yeah.
And so, again, just going back into, not that I'm then trying to get into the consultancy world and sort of like steal your thunder. So would you say, again, is it every time, is it the first thing you see when you go into an organisation that's struggling that this is the pattern that they've adopted, or is it more like this? It's a little bit more nuanced, isn't it? But I'm just trying to work out in my head is like when you go in, is this like the first thing you sniff out?
Yeah, good question. No, because it's never obvious. But you are looking for those buried giants. They're in every organisation, and what you've got to have to be careful about is not to take the kind of observable effects at face value. For example, you'll hear, "Oh, morale is low. Oh, morale is at an all-time low." No one's ever said to me, morale is at an all-time high. Never. They always say morale is at an all-time low, even though, worse than yesterday. But that is only an effect. And like some people will be a hammer looking for a nail. They go, well, we really have slipped behind in terms of, let's say, salaries. So we'll pay everyone an extra £1,000 a year. Right. Everyone wants £1,000, but we would have the same problems because it's never that. It's a hygiene factor, but it's never that. And then you have to kind of work through the levels of recursion to find the root causes of this unhappiness within the business. And then, however uncomfortable or difficult those issues are, you have to proactively address them head on. That is what I'm saying.
Right. So in that analogy, the £1,000 is the quick you believe is what they'd deploy is the quick win solution, which is just a paper in the cracks for probably a month.
Yeah, and actually it's a bad example. It would be something like, well, people are a bit sick of the cafe. It's fish and chips every Wednesday. So let's change that up. Let's have hot dog Wednesdays. It's that sort of thing where they think that the way to fundamentally adjust the morale of the business is to change from fish and chips to hot dogs on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's usually a willful blindness to something really rather fundamental in the business that has gone wrong.
Yeah. So who did you take because I find this fascinating, but so pre-consultancy days, is this something you're interested in already, or you'd read about, or is it that you've seen just through experience that you've gathered this opinion? My kind of road to Damascus moment was the British cycling thing, if I could talk about that. Yeah.
So Brailsford, who's up the road now at Man United, he made his reputation by coming into British cycling in 2003 and bringing with him this idea of the aggregate marginal gains, the idea that you can improve a bunch of things by 1% and kind of in combination they can deliver a kind of substantial transformative effect. And there were a bunch of articles, you must be familiar with them, the changes they made around that time in terms of materials like new helmets, new aerodynamic uniforms, rounder wheels, new materials in the bikes themselves. Then kind of thinking adjacently, so our athletes perform better when they've had a good night's sleep, so we're going to get new pillows and new mattresses for everybody. And then things, thinking even broader, like outside that onion, we'll have no handshakes, so there's no germs being transmitted between the team at meets, to the point where they whitewashed the training facility so you could see the dust and the dirt before it got into the gears of the bike. It was incredible. His first full Olympic cycle was between 2004 and 2008. We went from nothing to the top of the medals table. And at the same time, he was working with Team Sky, later Team Ineos, on the road. But British cycling had barely won a single stage of the Tour up until that point. Then Bradley Wiggins wins it with a British team in 2012. Team Sky wins 7 out of the next 8 years. By any measure, British cycling was the best on the planet from nothing. Yeah. And Brailsford took a lot of that credit and he put it down to this marginal gains thing. And it was such an amazing, persuasive origin myth that I think it kind of hopped the fence into the real world and people believed it. And so now you can see articles saying this is how you lose weight, this is how you train for a marathon, this is how you deliver agile software, this is blah, 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 because of this origin myth. And when I found out that it had nothing to do with washing hands or round the wheels, that was the moment where I was like, I think there's something here. Yeah.
So what, if you'd been flying the wall there and then could say this was what the success was of British cycling, so was it though that strategic direction of this is where we want to be, and therefore a whole new bike to buying a whole new set of a fleet of vehicles? I don't know if you call a fleet of bikes, but whatever you call a fleet, I like bikes, but I've not got a fleet. Was it buying a whole new fleet of bikes, which is actually a massive investment, and the pain of undoing commercial agreements with previous sponsors and previous ones, which would be maybe not seen because of the amount of financial disruption? Was it those big changes that actually you'd say, if that was the story that was interpreted and it was those kind of things that came out in the press and people believed in that, would that be a more acceptable, like it wouldn't be the same myth that you would get frustrated about?
Yeah, this is my thing. It's a neoliberal myth. It's around the same time as Cameron and nudge theory and all that. It's the idea that we can do a bunch of tiny little things and the state is not involved and let people make their choices and we can iterate towards a better tomorrow. It was money. It was money. It was the National Lottery, launched in 1994. British cycling was being funded to the tune of £20,000 a year. By the time we reached 2000, it was 175 times more money. 175, not 175%, 175 times more money.
It's massive.
By the time we reached Beijing, it was 1,000 times more.
Yeah.
20 million quid per Olympic cycle. We outspent all the other countries at a sport where money equals success. That's how we did it.
Yeah. So I'm interested. I know we said we wouldn't go down to like two middle-aged white guys talking about like cycling and football. But the one that they also, because it was funny when you said like, oh, Brailsford, and I went, yeah, and you went, you don't support United, do you? I'm like, yeah. And you're like, oh, you're going to be really unhappy. But is that the bit where, again, like the analogy of United over the last few seasons, it hasn't been, it's been incrementally trying to get back to where they are and we're nowhere near. So do you believe that bringing in that theory, if it truly is a theory, is going to fail, and it is actually more that you have to have a strategic view and take the hard yard decisions, which might be very painful in the short term? I think that's the only way someone that is on that demise of success needs to address it.
Yeah.
And so Brailsford going in there, where he's associated with marginal gains, will you believe he will try and do a marginal gains theory, or will it be more he will apply the real thing that he did and not mask it with marginal gains?
I don't know about masking it, but he's good at spending other people's money, and there is money in United, but you need to spend it on big things.
Yeah.
So what British Cycling spent their money on were massive things. It was the Manchester Velodrome up the road, tens of millions of quid.
Yeah.
It was hiring a dedicated team of psychiatrists for the first time to attend to the mental as well as physical side of the sport. Massive. They doubled the length of the training season by funding winter training in Mallorca. Massive.
Yeah.
They were spent tens of millions of pounds going into secondary schools, identifying young talent. Massive. Danny Rowe, etc. Then, in Tokyo, there were 26 riders in our team, right? Each one has 3 bikes. Each of those bikes is £30,000. That's 2.3 million quid just on bikes.
Yeah.
So if he can figure out the biggest things, which is my advice, right? The biggest return on investment, leaking roof, blah, blah, blah. Recruitment, training, you name it. If he spends his money right by addressing the biggest problems at United, then you stand to win a trophy maybe in 5 years' time.
Yeah. I apologise to all the listeners that detest football or cycling, and we've gone off. But I was just trying to work out in my head, because this is the fascinating stuff. Because this is the bit I didn't pick up when we had our pre-chat, when we were talking cycling, is because I was thinking, yeah, but they have been really successful. Is that it wasn't that they're not successful. It's what the myth that it was all about quick wins that was the thing that got them successful. That is the bit where I was left a little bit perplexed, scratching my head after a call, going, this is fascinating. I'm wondering where this one's going to go. So it is all about, you may have a quick win, don't avoid them, because if you're very lucky to have a quick win, grab it with both hands. But they are probably rare and, rare to find. And actually, it is finding those big, beefy, not going for the tactical, but thinking the long term, that sometimes you think of the scary ones, that if you invest in those and sprinkle them down again with a little bit of the pixie dust that you get with those quicks, that is where you get strategic success.
That's it.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm mentally exhausted after that, because this is a topic that I really don't know anything about, and obviously we've only just met face to face, so it's always good fun to have a bit of banter. Next time we have a debate, I'll hopefully be something that I can actually come back on. But yeah, thanks, David, for swinging by on the couch today.
Thank you so much, Pete.
So remember, please like and subscribe on YouTube. Hit the notification button so you never miss an episode. Follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And that is us done for today. Thanks again, David.
Thanks.